So I'm not expecting any fire alarms where I am, but do keep an ear out for this yourself. This is a safe space. Please do respect one another when you're making comments in the chat and asking questions. You can add any comments in the chat, but please do use the Q&A function to add any questions. You can also upvote any questions, and you'll be able to see both open questions and questions that have been answered by our speakers during the session. Next slide. So just a little bit for anyone who is unfamiliar with us, we are NCVO. That's the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, the largest network for charities and volunteering in England. And we represent over 17,000 voluntary organisations of all sizes, from the biggest household name charities to the smallest community groups. But at their heart, like you, they all have the aim of making the world around them a better place. And we'd love you to join us. Next slide. So just briefly, by becoming a member of NCVO, you can save time and money. As a member, you get exclusive access to information and guidance, downloadable tools and templates, discounted training, and more. And if you are a small charity with an income of under £30,000, membership is free. And we do have a special offer for June in honour of Small Charity Week, where we've extended that to those with an income of under £50,000 during June. Next slide. So questions we're going to be looking at today: what is an impactful merger and what examples are there of this? What practical advice is there out there for the design and delivery of impactful mergers from start to finish? What is the state of mergers in civil society right now? And where can I go for further support? So to quickly run through our agenda before I pass you on to the people you're really here to see. That was my welcome. I'm going to pass on to Iona from the Decelerator, who's then going to pass on to Eastside People. And then we're going to hear an honest account of a merger from Richard, who's been there and done that, before we open up to questions and discussion. And finally, signposting and close to close at 11:15. So just before I do that, we've got a couple of polls for you to find out a little bit more about the people in the room and why you've joined us here today. So my colleague Chanel is going to launch those polls. If you could please answer those questions. There's 3 questions for you. So the first question's asking about your income. Just give us an idea of who's in the room with us today. Excellent. Just move on to the second question. The majority of you kind of in the midpoint there. And the second question, have you had experience of a charity merger? A few people saying yes, they have, but 77% of you have not had experience with a charity merger. Next question, please, Chanel. And our final question, why are you here? Is it out of interest, because you're considering a merger, or because it's happening right now? Pretty even split there between just out of interest and because you're considering a merger. So I think that's really useful for our speakers to know why you're in the room. Excellent. Moving on to Iona.
Thanks. Oh, little cough there. Thank you, Amy. Hi, everyone. These webinar formats are always a bit discombobulating because I love to see everyone's little faces on screen. So forgive me for not being able to wave at you all and get some feedback. So my name is Iona, and I am one of a small number of people who are working for a new organisation called the Decelerator. And we exist to try and turn on its head some of our preconceived ideas about what endings look like in our organisations, the organisations that we pour our hearts and souls into. And all too often we will, protect and try to kind of safeguard at all costs. And we're not saying that that impulse isn't right, but we're here to say sometimes we think that the most impactful thing that might be on offer to an organization is to at least put on the table the idea that something might need to end. And so we offer first-hand support, free at the point of use, to any organization asking the question, does something need to end here? Might we need to close? Might a CEO or a founder need to step down so that we can unleash a new chapter? And of course, the subject for today is what might we stand to benefit, and how might our beneficiaries benefit from putting a merger on the table? And so if we move to the next slide, the idea of why we do this is because if we think about all of the stuff that goes into starting and growing things, accelerated programs, leadership schemes, funding rounds, books are written about it, and it comes to the end and everyone's like, oh, good luck with that, hope that never happens to me. And so we're here to try and turn it on its head, not just to put it on the table, but to make sure that organizations, when they want to put it on the table, have the full support of their wider sectors and of funders, because we believe that at this moment in time and for the foreseeable future, this kind of option is going to need to be on the table in many more organizations, because I don't need to tell you all as charity leaders that times are not straightforward, and that's not just a financial challenge, it's a myriad of challenges across our organizations and civil society more broadly. So if we go to the next slide, a couple of things. Next slide, already said that. We think that better endings are those that place an organization's purpose at the heart of decision making. So not just like, how do we protect these jobs, or how do we create a sustainability for the four walls of this organization, but what do our beneficiaries need from us, and how do we best serve them? Second of all, we think that better endings are those that seek to treat all people involved, staff, beneficiaries, volunteers, trustees, and indeed the wider sector, with as much respect and care as possible. And third of all, we think these endings are planned well enough and crucially funded adequately enough to secure a lasting legacy, because whether or not we intend it, if an organisation chooses to close with another, there are all sorts of legacies, better and less good, and we can be the architects of those if we have enough time and money on our side. If we move to the next slide, I know from my own experience that organisations all too often don't have the time, money, or headspace to do this stuff well. There's not space for it in trustee meetings, there's not an invitation for it with your funders, and it's not always seen as a necessarily good and lauded thing to do. And we think the cost of all of that is that we can lose decades of expertise overnight, because organisations can crash into unintended or unplanned endings. It places an extraordinarily unnecessary and an unfair emotional burden on the people involved, and we know that that has a negative lasting legacy for the impact of civil society. And third of all, we think that we all miss priceless opportunities to reflect and learn and collaborate, because sometimes we do need to rebuild kind of infrastructure or organizations. And if we're not learning from what's come before, because we just don't want to look at what was a catastrophe or something that we feel embarrassed or ashamed about, then we miss the opportunity to garner learning and build back better. So if we move to the next slide, please. We obviously exist because we believe endings are inevitable, but bad ones don't have to be. And this is some stuff, next slide please, that we're doing about it in the next 10 years. So we hope to exist just for 10 years. We're here to support people to put this on the table and bring it out of the shadows and make funders fund it better and make the regulator enable it better. And then we're going to get the hell out of the way. And that means that we want to help civil society leaders feel confident and skilled around this area. We want funders to actually open their pockets and not just say, good luck, I don't want anything to do with that ending. And we want the Charity Commission to enable it. And then right now, ways we can support you include, next slide, please. Thank you, Chanel, you're doing amazingly at this. if you have a hunch that something needs to come to an end, maybe it's something you haven't even said yet. Maybe it's something that the board have asked you to think about. Maybe it's something that you're just reading the room in your sector and you're like, if we don't get ahead of this, we will risk like this coming for us rather than us feeling ahead of it. Maybe you've taken a decision. We are here. We run a hotline and we are able to field calls from absolutely anyone with very little prior information required. And if you move to the next slide, please. And again, next slide, please. Oh God, next slide. You can be any kind of organization. You can be a charity, nonprofit, social enterprise. As I say, the hotline is a confidential, 1 time, 1 hour free coaching session for anyone who's considering whether the time has come, or perhaps the time has come and you're looking for a space to step back and consider all your options and make a really good plan. The second thing we then are able to do and offer is we have a growing number of tools, and those are tools that sometimes we've created, like something called our Sensing and Ending Toolkit, which is all about what a good closure can look like. But sometimes we signpost you to the wonderful people and resources are out there, like the Eastside People Good Merger Guide, which you're going to find more about in a second. And the third thing is we have a directory, and this is essentially places we can signpost you to free of charge, but that can provide you with deeper and more involved support, I suppose. And so this is where I hand off to Cara, because we do get a number of organisations who either over the course of a call come to realise that perhaps merger should be on the table, or perhaps they come to us saying we're considering merger, how the hell do we begin with this? And there are very few people as well placed to talk about what a good merger looks like and how you might make it happen than our friends and colleagues at Eastside People. Cara leads the mergers team there. I'll just finish by saying, as I hand off to Cara, basically, if you're asking, like, is it too early to put this on the table? Will funders even think about funding it? My 2 cents is it's never too early, and there are always options, at least for that you can take to funders. Whether or not your funders are progressive enough to see this as an apt investment is a different thing. And so, yes, if you have a hunch, I'd act on it. And if we can help you find a form of words over a hotline conversation that might enable you to take it to your board or something else, or your colleagues, then we are here to help. But Cara and Eastside People are the detail wizards when it comes to good mergers. So over to you, Cara.
You like being called a wizard. Thank you very much. That's great. So my name is Cara Evans. I'm from Eastside People. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Eastside People before I give you lots of information. So Eastside People is a charity consultancy that's been around for about 20 years. And we do lots of things. We do recruitment with board and senior leaders. We do interim recruitment, but we also do consultancy around strategy, around fundraising, around governance. And obviously I head up the partnerships and mergers department. And we support charities who are looking for partners, who are thinking about feasibility, due diligence, and merger implementation. So, but I'm here to talk to you about mergers. So if we can go to the next slide, please, that'd be great. So we have been producing something called the Good Merger Index for the last 10 years. This is a very comprehensive report, which tells you about mergers in the non-for-profit sector in the UK. And it's done every year, but it's looking at data from the previous sort of 18 months, so we can make sure we've got all the information that's out there. And it gives you a really good sense of what's going on in the charity sector right now. I'm going to give you some highlights from this year's report, which was produced in February 2024. And what we have seen for the last 2 years is a reduction in mergers. Which is in the last year, it was a 6% reduction from the previous year, and that was also a reduction. I've got a theory about what that is, which I'll tell you in a minute. I'm just looking at my other screen for my notes, so just bear with me. But really, you're looking at a reduction in takeovers, a reduction in overall sort of medium to large organisations, but takeovers is the highest proportion of mergers that have definitely is still happening. I'm going to talk about the types of mergers in a minute in the next slide. But also, even though there is a slight decrease, the income is actually across all that, the exchanges across that is 483 million. And what's quite interesting is, despite this data, obviously that, as I said, that was from 18 months ago, we've seen in the last year a 70% increase in organisations coming to talk to us about mergers, and a 30% increase in merger projects. So my theory is that during COVID, all organisations were head down trying to deal with that situation. But coming out of COVID, people are starting to talk about it, because mergers does take a lot of time and effort. So I think that's what's happening. So I have predicted that we might see more mergers in the next report, but we'll have to wait and see. Don't hold me to that. But if I can go to the next slide. I'm going to talk about the types of mergers. So I briefly talked about that just now. Oh, sorry, I meant to say on the report, you can download that if you want to read more information about what's happening. So types of mergers. The reason I include this slide is because I think people make assumptions when we talk about mergers, and they generally think we're talking about takeovers. But I think it's really important to know, and those of you who have started these conversations are probably already aware of this, there are different types. So yes, there's your traditional merger where two organisations come together and form a new organisation. And I think that's what a lot of people think. But there are takeovers where one organisation transfers its assets into another and is pretty much absorbed into it. But there's also other types as well. So there's a subsidiary model, which I think some of you may already be aware of, or there's a group structure where you have a parent organisation and two or more organisations transfer assets and activities to become a group. And you can have a number of people in that group, but that could mean that you still have some autonomy, and it might work better for you. Or there could be a swapping of assets as well. As I say, the reason I put this slide up is to let people know that there are options. And it's really important when you start to have these conversations, not to get stuck on one particular model. The purpose of the model is to ensure, as you go through those discussions, that you will ultimately have a model that works best for your beneficiaries. But it's not, if you can hold off on deciding that from the outset, and as you go through the discussions, make a clearer idea which is the best model for you, that really does benefit the merger. But I know that there can be very difficult conversations, particularly when you talk about takeovers. And it's why a lot of people use the word merger when they're actually talking about takeover, because it's a lot more palatable for a lot of people. Again, there's more information about these types of mergers in the Good Merger Guide, which I'll talk about a little bit later as well, and you can download that too. But if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay. A lot of people, when they think merger, they think the organisation's in trouble. And that might be the reason that you start to have a conversation. But there are lots of different reasons and benefits of strategic partnership and merger. Now, not every merger is going to be the same, and everybody will be coming to this for a different reason. But I really wanted to talk through this slide with you. I've got examples of mergers that Eastside people have helped in the last decade that relate to each of these reasons. And you will know what your reasons to believe are as you start the discussions. But I wanted to put this array out there to say it's not just about organisations that are in trouble. It's actually a way to potentially deliver your strategy or to do all of these things. So looking at greater profile and voice for campaigns, that's a particular one for a lot of charities. My example is with Meningitis Trust and Meningitis UK, who are now Meningitis Now. My God, that's so many different meningitis, sorry. And that's created the UK's biggest meningitis charity. And that just gives those organisations that bigger reach. Okay. Looking at economies of scale and back office savings, that one is an interesting one because I think it depends on the size of the organisation to ensure that there are some savings. But, you know, if you're part of another organisation, you're not going to need 2 accountancy firms. You're not going to need 2 audits, for an example. We worked recently with Bedford Hospice and Keach Hospice Care, and Bedford Hospice was struggling and Keach Hospice came in, and now they are running a much more efficient service and reaching more people, which is great. Geographical scale and reach. This is a reason a lot of people we talk to are looking to go into a different area, and rather than set up from scratch, they work with a partner to do that. We worked with Community Integrated Care, which is a health and social organisation, and they were looking for a research arm. And again, rather than invest in a whole new research arm, they worked with age exchange, and then they had this, you know, everything was set up already and they could absorb it into what they were doing. Again, much more effective. Funding diversity is a big thing. You might work with commissioners, you might not have a fundraising arm, you might not have a retail arm, and again, you can work with a partner to do that. My example there is Navigo and Care for All. Creation of a continuum of services is one of my personal favourites. We have recently worked with British Liver Trust and Children's Liver Disease Foundation, and you've got that continuum of services now for young people to adulthood, which is great. Service innovation, again, is a really good one because you could look at what the service that you're delivering. Safe Family and Homes for Goods have recently announced their merger, and we supported them with their feasibility study. Improved talent pool, again, a really good reason to think about getting some more skills and knowledge into your organisation. And my example there is Adaction and Kent Council Addition, working on mental health and drug and alcohol support, which means they can obviously support more people. And they're now called We Are You. That was a really tricky one to remember, but that's what they're called now. And then service improvements for beneficiaries. Now, this is the primary reason I want to encourage people to think about merger. Ultimately, we are here to support the beneficiaries that we work with. So if we can provide a better service for our beneficiaries, why would you not do it? But it is ultimately the reason you'd want to do that for a merger. So that gives you an example of all the different reasons why you might consider it. You can move on to the next slide. I'm not going to say there aren't challenges, because there are. And those of you who started to consider this will know it takes time and money. And a lot of people are concerned about loss of identity and mission. Although I would say on mission, ultimately, if your reason for doing it is to help your beneficiaries, then ultimately you're hopefully not going to lose that mission along the way. But loss of identity is a big concern for a lot of people. And then lack of knowledge. You might not even know anything about this at all. This is why we're running this webinar. But lack of knowledge is a big issue for a lot of people. And finding partners is hard. Finding the right partners that you're going to be able to work with in the right way. And there's, you know, the whole issue about your individual role and trust. So it's not an easy path to tread, but, you know, there are ways to do this well. So if we move on to the next slide, I wanted to talk through the process with you. Again, this more detail of this is in the Good Merger Guide, but it's a good idea to understand what you're taking on. You need to obviously have the agreement of your board. They need to be involved right from the outset. I know organisations who haven't done that and then have struggled. And when you agree to go to the next stage, I 100% recommend a feasibility study. Some organisations don't do it, but I think it really helps to understand if you're a strategic fit. Thank you for adding the link in there, Amy. Ultimately, a feasibility study will assess whether you're a strategic fit, an operational fit, a financial fit, communications and branding fit. And I think that's a really important thing to do, to step back and say, right, how is this going to work? What is it going to look like? Stage 4, due diligence, 100% need to know if there's any skeletons in that closet. It's really important to do that assessment. And it's just, yeah, it's one of the most important things, because your board need to be confident that they have followed their fiduciary duty, and whether you're being taken over, whether it's a merger of equals, are they confident that they've made the right decisions for the organisation going forward? Stage 5, clearly you need a plan. That plan needs to be developed with all the right people in the right way and make sure it's realistic and feasible. And then you need to follow that plan through. And it's important, I think, to differentiate those stages. Stage 7 is also really important. You need to remember that when that paperwork's signed, you're only on the start of the next stage of the journey. This is where you need to integrate those organisations at whatever governance model you've followed, but that's a really important part as well. So that's the process of mergers. When my last job before this was working with a charity called The Mix, who had done a merger in the past. And I sat down with the CEO and sort of looked through the key aspects of the merger. And then when I joined Eastside People, I sort of enhanced that. So I'm just going to go through each stage. Those of you who are already doing this probably know this well enough already. But you need to have a vision. You need to know what you're trying to achieve. What is it that what are your reasons to believe? This is what I say to everybody. You need to have those reasons to believe written down, because there's going to be bumps on the road and you need to remember, why am I doing this in the first place? And we talked about the benefits that could be your reasons. And the CEO and the chairs have to be involved from the outset. That's where the decision-making process is. But those conversations need to be happening right from the start. Communication, 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 always. And you need to involve the right people in the right way. Often what happens is people have those conversations at that senior leadership level at the beginning, but there will come a time that you will need to talk to the rest of the staff, and that needs to be planned very carefully. I'm always going to say seek support, but this is where we can help you, other people can help you. It's really important to get that help at the outset, and also talk to funders, because they're often interested in supporting you. Esme, for example, if you're an existing funder, we'll happily talk to you about merger support. Planning, we all need a plan, have to have one in there, obviously. Impact is about impact on the organisation. So ultimately, it's going to have an impact on your business as usual. So it's how you manage that with the resource that you've got. And I think that's really important to consider. We talked about staff. So again, you need to involve them in the right way. We all know those conversations in corridors happen, but you need to be able to control that as much as possible. So that communication to your staff needs to be as clear and honest and transparent as possible. You're going to need advice at some point, definitely some solicitors when you're looking at any kind of paperwork. So consider that as soon as you can. I've talked about due diligence, absolutely imperative. Now, the last one, I had speed, but I changed it to pace. So I think it's really important to manage it in a realistic way. This is a massive change transformation program for a lot of organisations. And it needs to be done at pace, not too slow, not too fast, but you need to manage it in a way that is realistic for your organisation, because it can take its toll. Okay, then we'll move on to the next slide. So my final slide is really just some useful resources. I've talked about the Good Merger Guide. I've personally used it myself when having to deal with a takeover situation for the charity that I was working for. And it's a really comprehensive guide and some good case studies as well. I found this checklist quite useful, so I popped it in there for you because I think it's quite a good one. Obviously, I'm going to signpost to NCVO, which has got some really good information on there for you. And then the last one is I did say Esme Fairbairn, yes. That's for existing funders. Sorry, I got distracted by that, sorry. So the last resource there is a summary note from Stone King, who are specialist solicitors who work on mergers. Again, it's quite a useful one. But if you read all of that, you will certainly be very confident in knowing a lot about mergers. But we are here. If you just want to have a chat about it, I'm here to talk through anything that we might be able to help you with, or anything that you want to talk through, and know that we can help. I think that's my last slide. Yes, and now I can pass to Richard, who we have worked with on the merger with Kishron Langdon, who is going to tell you what it's really like. Richard, can I pass to you?
Thank you very much indeed. Just a note to start with. I may get kicked out of the room I'm at. I've actually, we had a major donor meeting at one of our trustees' offices this morning, and I was due to be in another room, but they couldn't find me one. So I could get kicked out in the middle, or indeed introduce you to one of the trustees who was an architect of merger. During this 15 minutes. That is the law of sod, which is not on any of the slides thus far. So I've been asked to give an honest account of merger, warts and all, and scars. And I think the word honesty is a really good word to start with, because you as chief executives or senior opinion formers will need to, we all assume we're honest in our approach and in our integrity. We're here to save the world in our various different guises or otherwise. So why wouldn't we be virtuous? And I think that there are many competing objectives, many different stakeholders when it comes to merger. And I think you really have to ask yourself the question, why am I leading this organization to this vision? And there was a really good piece of work that came out around chief executive motivations by, I will dig it up in the chat, Gasly Sarson, which I think is really important because we all bring different strengths and weaknesses to the role. And it's really important to have an honest assessment for yourself of that, and also have the humility, particularly in merger, to realise that none of us are the full ticket, far from it, and to have the right checks and balances around you before making a fundamental decision that is going to transform, one hopes for the better, the lives of those that you are here to impact positively. So I guess that's my, at all stages and under all pressures, be honest with yourself. And if you're worried about that, make sure you've got people you trust around you. Trust is a second word that I want to focus on, because it's all the bumps and all, you're going to need to have a high level of trust with lots of people who are going to be concerned about their jobs, concerned you're going to take their jobs or their roles, and you're not going to have certainty yourself. How do you build trust? That will vary from circumstance to circumstance, but mergers, if I heard it once, I heard it 10 times, is nothing if it's not about people. 4 out of 5 mergers fail. Most mergers don't get to that stage. And so levels of trust to get you through those really hard days is very important. So just a bit before I start, I forgot to put my timer on because I'm notoriously bad at time. So I guess I've 40 minutes to go. Kishron Langdon. Kishron is they are both, as it sort of says on the tin there, Jewish charities for learning disability in Kishron sense, and learning disability and autism for Langdon. Kishron is the Hebrew word for talent, and it believes that everybody has an ability, and it's our responsibility in our communities to discover the talent within, to nurture and support, to enable people to learn, develop and grow. Langdon, also in that space, in fact larger than size. Kishron was 8, Langdon was 9 million. Langdon is named after Margaret Langdon, who was founder of Delamere, which was a forerunner, was a college, more of which later. There was a further education college, and then there's a foundation, Langdon Foundation, which was the charitable foundation supporting all other services that sort of outgrew the college. So in the names itself, it's challenges. One is values-based, and one is named after a person. One, Kishron, was more orthodox, Jewish orthodox, so more religious. Langdon was more cultural. So how do you unite around those? So the journey through merger started, pulled up someone who I've worked with before for many years and who I trusted, called Neil Taylor. His brother Warren is on this call. More Warren later, because Warren got us, or through Neil, who's his brother, to Eastside, who been absolutely fantastic. Can't remember enough in terms of the merger. So I knew Neil, and I've worked with Neil for years. And those who are au fait with the nuances of the British Jewish community, I believe there are, for each person, there's 1 in 6, isn't it? There's charities for, I think I'm getting it the wrong way around. There is, for every person, no, it's the other way around, there are 6 charities. It's 1 in 6 is the ratio. There's a ridiculous number of charities. Now, yes, there is the Mr. and Mrs. Cohen Trust for their child, for those lucky enough to have that, so far as their charitable objectives fit. But there is a plethora. The benefit of being part of the British Jewish community is every time something needs done, there's a strong civil ethic. Let's go do something about it. I know we'll start up a charity. The downside of that is a desire to impact in civil society, but the Jewish community and way beyond that, is that there are too many charities charities, and there's not enough. We were knocking on an open door, and there were 3 charities. There was another one. Ours was 8. What was ours? Fisheron, Langdon 9, and there was another charity, 35 million. And the previous CEO I'd worked with was for a number of years as well. So the trust levels for me were high to have that cup of coffee. And pretty much at that meeting, it was either going to go one or two ways, and it nearly went the other way. And again, that was around personalities. And we basically came together and thought, yeah, this is something that could and should be seriously explored. Cara made the point before, get your trustees on board early. Key trustees are excited about this. We'll need a steering group. And all of those sorts of things came into play. And to cut a very long story short, there have been many failed attempts at mergers. And so we had to get the groundwork right. And there are many management consultants, all of great value. One that we chose, without fear or favour, was Cordis Bright. The process of tendering, which revealed our different outlooks, was interesting in itself. And different chief executives played different roles at different times. And the art of compromise was important. Cordis Bright did a great piece of work around the landscape for the British Jewish community and learning disabilities and autism across the country over the next 30, no, it wasn't 30 years, it was less than 30, it was the next 15 years. And it wasn't really pretty, 12% growth in learning disabilities, local authority funding not matching, make your pound stretch further, and that was 300 pages in a nutshell. We then met with the various trustee groups of the 3 charities at the time. And what became apparent then, when the point was made before, is mission. What is your mission? And that is really important, I would say. Do not let, within the bounds of reasonableness, your mission be diluted. And with one of the parties, there was insufficient clarity within their own organisation as to what their mission should be. And while it was desirable on one level to bring 3 together to make a £50 million organisation, their size is certainly not everything when it comes to mergers, not your motivation. Absent that mission clarity, we didn't feel that we could proceed with that party, and indeed their approach towards merger. Are you going to be top down and say, here you go, guys, well done, you've merged, get on with it? Or are you going to build the teams? Are you going to build a merger bottom upwards, which is much more painful and it's expensive, but then you're more likely to get more buy-in from my experience, or from the experience that we have had that, certainly I guess, and you just don't know at that particular point. So we said, it's very upsetting for the party concerned, farewell to them. That in their organisation meant a parting of the ways, amongst other reasons, with their chief executive, who was for merger along the lines that we were talking about. But in any event, that was it's never as black and white as this. The First World War is often said to have started because of train timetables. And I think the over-ambition of a tripartite merger was the fact that actually getting the meetings coordinated between 3 sets of steering group members, 3 sets of trustees, let alone the chief execs and your senior leadership teams, was overambitious and just too hard. I would say, if you're thinking about merger, if you haven't got a PA or PAs worth their weight in gold in this, because managing diaries is pivotal to making things happen and keeping momentum going. So there we were left with the 2, and then from there, building from the bottom up, we then engaged a further set of management consultants to have working groups. There were significant cultural differences between the organisations, and we had to stress test effectively pre-mortems, a term that I became familiar with. My trustee board very kindly sent me off to Stanford University to do a course over the summer specifically for non-profits, and I'm going to pay for the flight, the accommodation. They paid for course such that it wasn't subsidised, And I sort of went there, and this very wise professor said, I'm here because, well, you know why I'm here, because we're in the middle of the merger. And he said, mergers, don't do them. It's rubbish. So well, I've come 6,000 miles, so please, a few hints would be useful. It was fantastic use of time and pre-mortems, trying to work out everything that could go wrong as best as you can through 10 working groups, engaging your trustees, engaging your key stakeholders was really important. We tested the hardest of issues for us. And basically, well, some areas weren't ideal. It was something that could be done. According to those lists that Cara said before, for us who were involved, so that was Neil Taylor and myself, and indeed the other party before, it was always about how could we improve the offering for the people we supported, the members of our respective organisations, the 450 or so core users, and many other, into the thousands who use external services. How can we improve their service? There are plenty of hawkish voices saying we will save money, and we were united in saying if this is about saving a few bob, it's a waste of time, effort, and energy, because your organisations are run quite thin. Those savings are going to take quite a while to come through. This is all about improving quality, and we stuck with that. And there was lots of but where's your cost savings? There are lots of powerful people in our particular circumstances around the world, but they are often not necessarily any more wiser about mergers than you are. There may be a few people who say they've done stuff. Carry your agency and carry your authority, and indeed the uncertainties that you will hold about. This will only grow your authority. So there we were. It took us a further year. This whole process before merger took us the best part of 3.5 years. We'd done an awful lot of research about the landscape. We knew that the two organisations could merge. And then you come to the hard and fast bit about heads of terms. And there, as well as you get on with your particular colleagues, when it was 3 organisations, it was very hard because I did fall out with someone who I considered a friend because we were representing our organisations. Thankfully, that was repaired over time. But you are representing your organisation, won't necessarily be aligned. And when those moments of trust fall, they can be really painful. So make sure you've got your support in there to be the most balanced, best version of yourself you can be through the harder times. So then there's the heads of terms, the different terms that people wanted. And then you are working with the management consultants. People have their own agendas. People fell out with the management consultants. And you're left in a position where and trustees will fall out with each other. And you are left there. Well, my particular bit that I brought to the party was to be able to hold them in part. There may be other people in your organisations that can fulfil that function, but make sure the core team, you have as many different skill sets that you feel you need around that particular table. So me, KPIs analysis, that hardcore data, I can do it and understand it for sure, but I'm not necessarily the person to drive that particular part. And make sure we have very good people looking at that, those analytics. And then ultimately it comes to a decision after 2 or 3 false starts. The issues become sufficiently clear. There'll be people throwing in curveballs. Do not despair. Just because you don't make the decision when you think you're making it, things happen and come up. And coming up for a year ago now, the 1st of August, we merged, but we didn't do so, by the way, before spending a lot of money again on our stakeholders. So I'm just looking to make sure how much time I've got. Our stakeholders. So, and that started with the people we supported. There were people who are non-verbal, people with really complex needs. Our view is nothing about us without us should be the monitor, the moniker. We are doing this with the blessing or otherwise of people we support. Their anxieties first and foremost, then the families concerned, then the staff, and then the donors. So we did a lot of quite complex work there. And there were people with reservations, but people were up for this journey. And so therefore a year ago, we then merged. And then you think, wow, I've got that. In fact, you're not even at the base camp. You are, depending on the size, I see the size is a bit smaller than us, but you're at base camp, because then you're employee number one. Everyone's looking at you, and you've got to get your governance in place really quickly. You've got to have the right fair approaches towards putting your team together. Be honest about the fact you're going to have subconscious bias, and put checks and balances, because you've worked with a number of your team on this, some of whom you're going to be saying there's no longer a job for you. And if it's merger and it's not takeover, you've got to bring together two teams to settle them really quickly. And you're not going to have an HR team. That's another learning. So Eastside were absolutely fantastic in getting me HR support, which was superb. So you get the thing up and running. I've never given birth to see my son born, but it certainly felt like giving birth. And oh, by the way, a month before merger, I got rushed into hospital for an emergency procedure, and they put stents in. So I was literally recovering from a heart procedure, and sort of people forgot about it literally within an hour of surgery, and then got rushed back in again in January, because the pressure is intense. Make sure you're fit, stay off your alcohol, or your chocolate biscuits, whatever it is. These are really tough things. So emotionally, how it felt for everybody was people are in different places in different times. Depending on the sort of leader you are, your EQ and your antennae are really important. And if that's not you, if that's not your sort, that's fine. Make sure you've got people around you who've got high EQ, because the emotion of these things is really important. And when you are saying to people, we've either by choice or otherwise in the past, 10 months, 9 people from the senior leadership team or thereabouts have moved on. And there are others besides, and you're holding that emotional, that real anger and hostility. Trustees, they're moving on as well. You need to hold your trustees to account about if you're expecting change here and it's changed the better. There needs to be change on the two old boards coming together to be one new old board is no good to you. This is a real chance for a step change. In terms of what I wished I'd known now that I knew before, it's not the goodwill that counts. It's not the good intent. It's the silences. It's the we'll do this. We're all friends together. Whatever the thing is, I'm a lawyer by profession, so you see the other side of human nature. Keep your eyes open without letting trust levels low for the other side of human nature. It was unfortunate that on our first set of management accounts, as you're finding what comes under the bonnet, there were things there that I'm sure those directly involved would have preferred not to have seen. But just because those things happen doesn't mean there's malice aforethought or intent. Mergers are expensive. This one would cost us £500,000. You are fundraising for it, like a project. No one wants to have £500,000 worth of what they want for the frontline services sunk in our particular case. So you have to have philanthropic partners, I would say, so that the cost of merger, a bit like a cost of a dinner is sponsored by, you cover that sort of cost. I've run over time. I'm sure there'll be questions. I hope that is some experience of what I've gone through is helpful for you.
Thank you, Sam. Oh, sorry. Tried to speak then and nothing came out. Thank you very much, Richard, for giving us that personal account of your experience of merger. We have had a couple of questions, and there's a couple of questions come in the chat as well. So I'll put those to our panelist. Cara's been very on it and answered a couple that have come in already, but we will just go over those again because I'm sure the answers will be beneficial to everybody on the call. A great question here, which is for you, Cara. We heard you say that 4 out of 5 mergers fail, if that's correct. And it'd be really interesting to hear a little bit more about that. what do we mean by fail? Do we mean the merger didn't go ahead in the end, or they went ahead and then the merged organisation failed? Some key reasons would be really interesting.
Yeah, sure. I think it was actually Richard that said it, but he's absolutely right. I don't like to talk about failures, so that's why I don't often mention it in mine. It's completely right, Richard, 100% right. So there's a variety of reasons why mergers aren't successful. And I think when people use the word fail, they mean it didn't go ahead. So I think, you know, it might stop at some stage. So what, you know, where I talk through those 10 things that need to happen, it's the opposite of those often causes the failure. So the CEO and the chair aren't aligned at the beginning. If they are, it's more chance of success. If they're not, it's more chance of failure. Something comes up in the due diligence that people like, there's too many liabilities, I'm not willing to take that risk. There might not be agreements about the governance model. It could simply be that they don't want to be taken over. They envisaged a merger of equals. That's not what one party wants. So it could be a variety of different reasons, even to the point that some people aren't happy to give up their branding. So I've known mergers that have gone through all the different stages and the branding issue was not discussed. And then they get to the crucial point and it's like, no, we're not giving it up. And that's a deal breaker. So then it's not successful. So if you follow all the sort of top tips that I have in there, you are more likely to succeed. But it is a very, very, you know, there's a lot going on. So there's a lot of things that could mean it's not successful. But yeah, so those are some of the reasons. I hope that answers the question.
Would anybody else like to come in on that at all about anything that to think about? No?
I suppose, seeing as I said it, and it was, you know, so often banded statistic, I think there are lots of people who say, yes, I think merger's a good idea. It's a bit like building a new school or whatever, you know, a new animal sanctuary. It comes back to my honesty point. How much do you really believe in it? How much do your key stakeholders really believe in it? Because there are going to be some really hard times ahead. So you have to have that belief, and you have that resolve that's enabled you to reach the positions that you're in and deliver the fantastic stuff that you've been doing. You've got to dig really deep with that resolve. And also, we say 4 out of 5 fail. I sometimes wonder, because we were very 50-50 about whether it would actually happen in the end. So sometimes against, and Neil and I would bound to the numbers. By failing isn't necessarily a failure. It might be a failure to push through and succeed, because the consequences on your stakeholders if you get it wrong are huge. You know, we have been in our community, and I think it's relevant. You know, there's events nearby that some prime minister said many years ago. Literally within 2 months of merger, what happened on October the 7th in Israel, the slaughter of the innocents, and that which followed, meant that fundraising for us dried up completely because there was an emotional pull elsewhere. That's 300,000 every single month that we weren't getting in for 7 months until we could repair it. That went to our reserves. So you're going to have it. So the question was, had we known how events were going to unfold, would we have proceeded at that point? So failure, it's not necessarily, sometimes it takes a very brave person to pull up the handbrake where momentum is taking the steam train in one particular direction. It's not necessarily a failure.
Thank you, Richard. A bit of a governance question. So what's the usual practice with boards of trustees with the different models of merger? We might not be able to get into all of it, but maybe it's one for you, Cara, I don't know. Is there any precedent for a linked charity retaining a small independent board with joint trustees sitting on the boards of both? What's your experience of this, Cara?
Yeah, so it varies. I think I said in my presentation, every merger is different, but depending on the governance model that you want, I think I'm just thinking about the group structure might be the best one in this case, because obviously you have the parent organisation and then you have a separate organisation where you tend to have a separate board then, but obviously that board does speak to the other board of the parent company, so that is a possibility. There are all different types of options, and I think it's one of those, we talk about red lines. So if at the beginning of the discussions, that's an important thing for you, it's about making that clear with any partner or anybody that you're working with, that, you know, we need to understand how the governance is going to work. And I think that's really important for a lot of organisations. So I won't go into too much detail because it'll depend on the particular case, but there's always options, and just talk about them right from the beginning, so that everybody's clear. I think that's really important. I hope that answers the question.
And would the Good Merger Guide be a good place to go to get some of that information, Cara?
Yes, I think there is definitely some stuff in there. I think, and I'm also very happy to have a conversation with you, because if it might relate to your particular organisation, I might be able to give you a bit more intel, and I'm really happy to have that call, because I think it will depend on your organisation. If it's a case-by-case basis, it's a bit harder. So we are actually looking at potentially pulling together a paper, and Warren's on the call and he's helping me with it, which is about the various different pros and cons of each of the different types of models. So we'll look at putting that out at some point. Fingers crossed we could do that. But yeah, so that it's definitely worth having a call with me just in case.
Brilliant. Thank you, Cara. Another question that's come in here around, what are the actual costs involved in a merger? So we're not talking figures, but what are those costs that people might not immediately think of? For example, legal fees.
Yeah, I couldn't give you a ballpark, I'm afraid, because it depends on how
much. The kind of things you need to bear in mind.
What I can tell you is some of the things you need to consider. So I think Richard talked about HR support. So that's something that some people need a little bit of extra help on. Obviously, you can deploy people like ourselves to support you and guide you through the process, or even just manage the whole thing for you, whatever you need. You're definitely going to need solicitors as well. That's really, really important. And yeah, so there's basically any kind of managerial support that you're going to need in the process. If you don't have that already, you might want to think about some. Thank you, Iona. I'm just looking at that. All professional
Sorry,
services.
I feel like I'm like quoting on you, which isn't very helpful.
No. I know, that's fine. Iona's absolutely right. It's all the professional services that you're going to need in order to do it. Sorry, Iona, do you want to add, and I'll be quiet for a bit.
Oh no, sorry, I was just riffing, and I was trying to create a list, and then it didn't come as a list, and then it all started coming out. But one kind of, I think, rule that we don't have rules, but kind of assumption that we have with mergers and any sorts of complicated ending or transition processes is that, like, you know, as charity people used to cutting costs, and with this stuff not being an obvious thing to be able to fund or even put in a budget, we're like, oh, well, we can probably just cobble it together from our existing resources, and, you know, we can make people work double time and hope that the chief execs can pull it out of the bag. And, you know, if we ask our funders for any money, we should probably really downplay it, because otherwise they're going to run for the hills. And we are always around at the Decelerator trying to encourage people to think a little bit more openly and expansively about what good mergers look like. We just heard from Richard that, like, yeah, it's a really complicated technical process that does require lots of professional services type support, so accountants, lawyers, HR professionals, but also, like, if we don't attend to some of the emotional and relational dynamics through coaching, facilitation, proper conflict mediation where it's required, then you're just going to cook yourself up a bit of a problem for further down the line, because you're going to have jammed two organizations together without attending to some of the cultural and emotional dynamics. So asking yourself the question, like, if we were in the process of setting up a new program or project, what would we apply? And then maybe apply the same types of budget lines to a merger budget as you would to other parts of the organizational cycle, because our kind of business as usual often just says, we'll just cobble it together. I'd also say, never underestimate the role of outsiders. Like, if you are in a position to be able to do so, people who can do project management and facilitation that sit outside of the 2 or 3 organizations in question can bring a really helpful, like, outside perspective. you know, if you're planning other really difficult things, you would say like, well, the people who are closest to this might need the help of people who are a bit further away from it in order to see the wood from the trees. And so, yeah, like transition directors where it's possible, or even transition project managers, or extra admin capacity, as Richard said, around PA support, because the scheduling is going to be hell. All of that stuff is so useful, and all of that stuff can be delivered really like valuably by people who aren't so up close and involved in the deeper, more emotional elements of like what it takes to combine forces. So I'll stop.
If I can put some pound, shillings and pence, it sort of it does depend on what sort of merger you wish to do. So if you with your chair say, right, I want a top-down merger, quick and dirty, you can do it a lot cheaper, but you're storing up a load of problems, I would suggest. But it depends how risk averse you are. I was at the end of a merger when I was a partner in a law firm in the City of London. I was brought in as the Director of Fundraising at KHP, which was the merger of King's College London and the teaching universities, and I saw that bit hadn't been done, and you carry the lessons. This is the first one I've seen from start to finish. What I would say is, even if it's costs, and your trustee will say, we all trust each other, independence. You wouldn't share a solicitor on your own house purchase. Why would you share an accountant on your due diligence, financial due diligence? You want to have someone to sue where it's something's not been properly ascribed, and protect yourself. So I would say this: I'm a professional. I would invest in the professional fees. It protects yourself, but then people say, well, they're so good lawyers and accountants at caveats that is it really worth the paper it's written on? Well, it is. That's your role and responsibility to test it. And if you're not sure on something, ask a friendly accountant or lawyer what they should be looking for. So what you may find is that everyone's going to be very fixated on tenders and screwing people to the last penny on is this person reasonable? And then once the tender process is out of the way, as lawyers well know, and they screwed them down to 9,000 for the first stage, all of a sudden the invoices start flying in, and the costs don't, after that, because everyone's forgotten about that, and the costs don't stop at merger, right? We've got a 2-year integration period, 30 different projects, and the costs fly in on that side as well. So your base level costs, for us, it was complicated. Even the firm that we used, who were well used to do this, so this was complicated given the structures of both. We would have ended up 175,000 just on legals alone. The financial due diligence, the base level financial due diligence, we did it on the cheap, not necessarily sensible, 30,000 for that. That's then you've got management consultants. I don't want to give away your fees, management consultants, and then all their add-ons, but you're paying 30s and 40s there by the time you finish down VAT and all the rest of it. If you've got anything you can put your VAT through, that's useful. That's how it soon adds up. There are lots of people who will also want to get benefit, their experience from being part of your merger. You need to decide, a bit like when you go into a clothes shop, am I going to buy this? Am I going to buy a really nice Versace suit, or will the M&S one be fine for these purposes? All those sorts. Your decision-making process will be your decision-making process, and very few people would have done it. So it's completely legitimate to ask questions for those who have.
I think I'm hearing here that. Sorry, Cara, go ahead.
Just want to add two things. So I compare it more to buying a house than going to the shops. And you know who you need when you buy a house. I think Ian's description, and Richard, thank you, was really, really helpful. One thing I would contradict on Richard, though, is what we have done is represent both organisations in a merger before around due diligence, because that's more effective. I know that for some people that's like, oh, how's that going to work? But it does, because you absorb the information and you produce the facts. That's what essentially we're doing. But I think it's it's exactly as Richard said, you need to think about it as, you know, a program of work and how you would fund that. And it's very hard to predict how much it's going to cost because it depends on the type of the organisation, the type of merger. But yeah, you need to plan for it and budget for it and support your staff where they need it. Although it can also be a learning experience for some staff as well. So it's worth considering that.
I think the thing I was hearing here was that kind of planning and due diligence is really key here, before you kind of launch into something. And for the kind of smaller organizations on the call here, there is also a lot of pro bono support available. We've got some of that on the call today, and you can also come to us at NCVO on the NCVO Small Charity Help Desk, where we can signpost to various types of support. So please don't feel that you're alone in this, or that it's going to cost you loads of money to kind of put it on the table and explore it. There was a great question which Cara managed to answer around kind of when to approach funders, and I know that Iona's a big advocate of getting those conversations in as early as possible. Just for the final minute before I signpost, I wondered if there's anything else you might want to add on that, Iona or Cara.
So we are, as yet, we're still in our pilot phase at the Decelerator. So hopefully if we were in a year from now, I'd be able to point you towards a conversation guide and a starter for 10 on how you raise these conversations with your funders. We haven't yet written it. And therefore the best I can offer is if you're like, we think we should put this on the table with our funders, but my gut says they're going to run for the hills, call us and we will arm you with a few things and options that you might be able to talk to people with and start conversations around, and B, examples of plenty of ways in which funders have responded positively and proactively to those conversations, because we think that some of this is about raising the tide and helping people see that they wouldn't be alone if they were to see this as ambitious. So yeah, we can speak to you, and hopefully in time we'll have some smart blog or list of things that will help you.
I have no doubt we'll look for that. I am going to bring the Q&A to a close here just because we're running out of time a little bit. All of those resources that have been mentioned throughout the call from Cara and Iona are in the slides, and we'll include those in the follow-up email as well. Just to make you aware, on NCVO's side also, we do offer consultancy and mentoring in strategy and organizational change, which is another avenue you might be able to go down as well. And just the final slide, please. Lara. Brilliant. Before we close up, I just wanted to give a big thank you to all three of our speakers, Iona, Cara, Richard. Brilliant to hear different perspectives on merger today. And we will send a follow-up email with the resources in that. And I just wanted to make you all aware, if you're not aware already, that we are hurtling towards June, which means it's nearly Small Charity Week. So the last week in June is Small Charity Week. Head to the Small Charity Week website to find out more. We've got a couple of free webinars going on there, and you can also add your own events. But something I particularly wanted to make you aware of on this call is that we have a special offer for our small members at NCVO, which we are calling 30-minute mentoring, where we are matching up our smaller members with our larger members. And some of the topics have still got spaces, including marketing and communications and HR, both of which could be useful to you if you are considering a merger. How are you going to communicate this to your stakeholders, to the public, and dealing with HR? That's been mentioned. Richard mentioned needing that kind of support. So head to the Small Charity Week website. We'll put that in the chat, and book a slot if you've got a meaty question that you might be able to discuss with a larger organisation who's perhaps experienced something. And it doesn't have to be about mergers. Just wanted to put that on the table for you to consider. So Chanel is just going to open up a quick feedback poll. Really grateful if you are able to complete that for us quickly. It's so helpful to us to know whether you found the webinar useful and what we can improve on. There's 2 questions today. How satisfied are you, and have you learned something today that you will use in your organisation? And when you close this event today, you will have a slightly longer, although it's still super short, poll pop up from Zoom with a few more questions. Again, we really appreciate those of you who fill that in. We very much take it on board, and it influences the webinars that we put on throughout the year. And finally, thank you for everybody who's participated in the poll. You will see a QR code on your screen there. If you scan that with your phone, that takes you to the page to join NCVO. I know somebody said they couldn't scan it, and Chanel has helpfully put a link in the chat as well. Just a reminder, as I said earlier, that if you join NCVO in June and you have an income of under £50,000, you will get our free membership offer in honour of Small Charity Week. And all of those details are on the Small Charity Week website, which we will put in the chat. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. And thank you again to our speakers. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.